Good afternoon, Realtors. Welcome to the South Carolina Realtors Forms webinar. Today is July 27th, 2017. Questions on forms during the webinar, just type them on your screen and South Carolina Association Realtor Lawyers Byron King and Austin Smallwood will respond. Mike Christ of SCR will upload this video onto YouTube afterwards. So if you have questions after the live webinar, simply email Byron at screaltors.org. or Austin at screaltors.org, or call us at 803-772-5206. The forms updates discussed today are scheduled to go into effect in the SCR library and the Zip Forms library on September 1, which coincides with the Forms Committee meeting on August 30th at the South Carolina Realtor Annual Conference in Greenville. That'll be from 10 a.m. to noon on August 30th at the Greenville Hyatt Hotel. And there's still discounted brokerage pricing for realtors that are interested in going. For brokerages that can get 5 licensees together to go, that's at $225 a person. And 10 licensees, you get a further discount of $200 per person. So that's a discount of about 30%. That's a good deal. So sign up for that. It's filling up fast, some good speakers, and it'll be fun in Greenville. Also, South Carolina Association Realtors is developing broker licensing for brokers desiring to use vendors other than your member benefits provided Zip Forms. So contact Byron and Austin about that. That'll be coming up soon. The Forms Committee under Liz Loadholt, your presenter today, and last year's Forms Chair Peggy Gainey have been working on these forms changes for about a year. They got interrupted a little bit with license law changes into the forms, and the commercial task force under Bob Nuttall came up with commercial forms. They're working on that. But to introduce Liz today, our today's webinar presenter is Liz Loadholt, aka Mama Liz. She's a graduate of Winthrop College and has been in the real estate industry since 1976. She and her husband Boyd Loadholt have always worked together, and in 1991 they co-founded the agent-owned realty company in the Charleston area. Liz and Boyd have 2 children, 3 grandchildren, and Liz considers all of her 520 licensees as her children and their children as her grandchildren. Liz currently serves as broker in charge of 4 real estate offices, as well as serving as the relocation director and training director for agent-owned realty. And she is chairman of the 2017 Forms Committee for South Carolina Association of Realtors. Liz's hobbies include her grandkids and dancing the shag dance with Boyd, and networking, and her real estate company. She loves teaching and working with real estate professionals, so I think you're really going to enjoy this webinar. She has written many courses for the South Carolina Real Estate Commission for continuing education and teaches continuing education courses. She is certified as an LLR instructor as well as a distance education instructor. Liz, thanks for doing this webinar today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Byron. I'm delighted to be here. As he said, my name is Liz Loadholt, also known as Mama Liz, and I am the current chairman of the Forms Committee for the South Carolina Association of Realtors. Today, we're going to look at the major changes to the Form SCR 310, which are Earnest Money, Repair Procedure Clause, the CL 100 Clause. We're also going to look at proposed changes to the SCR 310. We're going to discuss Repair Procedure. We're going to have a discussion of Due Diligence, which is Form SCR 311. We're going to have a discussion of the Repair Request Addendum, which is SCR 525, and clauses for addendum amendment, Form SCR 391. We're going to talk about property disclosure changes by LLR, the residential real estate property disclosure changes, and we're going to talk about wire fraud warning, which is SCR Form 610. So used to saying 3s, SCR 610. There are 3 major changes to the SCR 310, as we said. There's the Earnest Money change, the Repair Procedure Clause, and the CL 100 paragraph. And then there are a few proposed changes. We'd like your input on the proposed changes. As Byron said, he and Austin are there to answer any questions that you have about the changes as we go through them, and also any input you have on the proposed changes. We would really like to hear from you about those. I wanted you to see the Form 310, just to make sure we're all on the same page here. This is the Form 310 as you see it now, the agreement contract to buy and sell real estate, residential. It's also known as a subject financing contract. It's also known as repair procedure contract. But today we're referring to it as SCR 310. And this is what the Section 5 of the SCR 310 looks like today. Just so that you make sure that you are on the same page with me, this is what we're talking about today. It's being changed, and we're going to show you what the new section looks like. But before I get into that change, I really thought it was important to share with you the license law. It's being discussed first, earnest money, because it's a major change. It's a hot issue now in South Carolina. There have been and are issues with LLR regarding brokers releasing earnest money according to the contract. The primary change, which is earnest money disbursement requiring a disbursement document signed by all the parties or a judge, will take the contract back to pre-2012 procedures, and it follows a broker in charge winning his contractual disbursement of earnest money case at LLR. But yet the LLR staff continues to investigate broker in charges for contractual disbursement of earnest money, and the commissioners making statements that these investigations will continue. So I thought it was a good idea for us to look at what the South Carolina license law says about disbursing earnest money. So we have here, this is taken directly from the license law, section 4057-136. It says, if a dispute concerning the entitlement to and disposition of trust funds arises, if a dispute arises between a buyer and a seller, and the dispute is not resolved by reasonable interpretation of the contract by the parties to the contract, the deposit must be held in the trust account until the dispute is resolved by a written agreement which directs the disposition of monies signed by all parties claiming an interest in the trust monies, and must be separate from the contract which directs the broker in charge or property manager in charge to hold the monies. It says it has to be a written agreement signed by all parties claiming an interest, and it must be separate from the contract. So you have to have a written agreement or the filing of an interpleader action in a court of competent jurisdiction, or an order of a court of a competent jurisdiction, or voluntary mediation. This is what the license law actually says. So now we're looking at the new verbiage for the earnest money section, and this is the first paragraph. We have it in yellow. The yellow throughout this presentation indicates that it has been approved by the executive committee and will be in the contract on September 1st. So we have here, it says a total amount, earnest money, to be paid as follows. Blank accompanies this offer, and blank will be paid within blank business days after the effective date, and earnest money is in the check, cash, or other, for example, wire. And if it, whatever the other is, if that's the case, you would write it in here. To be a credit to buyer at closing, are disbursed only as parties agree in writing, or by court order, or by contract, or as required for the closing by closing attorney. Buyer and seller authorize whoever is going to hold the earnest money as escrow agent to deposit and hold and disperse earnest money according to the terms of any separate escrow agreement, the law, and any regulations. Broker does not guarantee payment of a check or checks accepted as earnest money. Parties are direct escrow agent to communicate reasonable information concerning receipt and status of earnest money upon a broker request. This is new verbiage for the earnest money section. And as I said, we have it in yellow to indicate it has been approved. Let's look at the top section of this paragraph and talk about how this works. There seems to be a lot of confusion among realtors and licensees about this. I see a lot of it. So up here it says the total amount of earnest money. If the buyer is going to give $7,000 earnest money or $500 earnest money, that amount goes in here. That's the total amount. And then you have to decide, is it going to accompany the offer or is it going to be paid within so many business days? If all the total amount, the whole total $500, is going to accompany the offer, then that would go here. And then it would put 0 here, or either NA, and NA here, because you've given it all up front. However, if they don't want to give it up front, I can't, because they've got to go back and transfer funds, then you would put 0 here and put the amount of the earnest money, be it 500 or 3,000, 7,000, whatever the total amount is, would be here to be paid within 2, 3, 4, 5 business days, whatever y'all agree on. So I don't know why this is confusing to some people, but it seems to be. Then the other thing is, it says earnest money is in the form of a check, cash, or other. Guys, it says a check, a cash, or other. It is one of these things. So check a box. If it's a wire, write wire in here. If it's some other form, put that there. And then the other thing that comes up is want to make sure that whatever name is here in this contract as the escrow agent is going to be the name on the front of the contract. Excuse me, the front of the check. So if it says XYZ Realty Company here, the check should be made out to XYZ Realty Company. I've seen confusion on that as well. Let's talk about the advantages of using money to be paid within business days and the disadvantage of it. With the new license law this year that a licensee cannot have earnest money or a check in their hand more than 24 hours, it has to get out of their hand and get to the broker in charge, then it is becoming more advantageous to use this section where it will be paid later. The advantage is that you get out of worrying about getting that money out of your hand within the 24 hours. The disadvantage is that you forget about it and you forget to make sure that money has been collected. And down here, I'm sure you noticed that it says it will be dispersed only as agreed in writing or by court order or by contract. The language throughout this contract talks about by contract, about who's entitled to get the earnest money. It's really there so that a judge can decide who gets the earnest money. It doesn't mean because the contract says the buyer gets it back that the broker in charge is going to be able to disperse it that way. Earnest money remains so that a judge can make that decision. Example, maybe the financing contingency. It says if the buyer tries to get a loan but is turned down and then they terminate, the buyer gets the earnest money. Having this in the contract, then that judge will more than likely award the earnest money to the buyer. Continuing with the earnest money changes. It's in yellow, so it's changed and it's been approved and it will be in the September 1st contract. The parties understand and agree that under all circumstances, including default, escrow agent will not disperse earnest money deposit to either party until both parties have executed an agreement authorizing the disbursement. That is SCR Form 518, which is your release of contract, or SCR 517, which is a disbursement form or mediation agreement, or until a court of competent jurisdiction has directed a disbursement. Earnest money will not be disbursed until determined to be good funds. If legal actions occur related to earnest money, party receiving the least amount of earnest money in the court's disbursement order agrees to indemnify escrow agent's fees, court costs, and attorney fees. If interpleader is to be utilized, parties agree that blank dollars shall be paid to the escrow agent by the parties as compensation before escrow agent initiates court of competent jurisdiction proceedings on the earnest money. Contractual disbursement of earnest money language is in contract, so the court can allocate disbursement. This section right here about the interpleader just means that if the broker in charge has to enter a suit in a small claims court with an interpleader, then this gives them, the parties are supposed to give that broker this amount of money to handle the expenses of it. Typically, most small claims courts are $90, $95, somewhere along in there. So typically $100 here would take care of that. Guys, this paragraph, plain and simple. Broker is not going to release earnest money until both parties have signed an agreement as to whom should get the earnest money, or a court has directed the broker in charge as to whom to give the earnest money. Warning: only disperse broker in charge held earnest money with a disbursement agreement signed by both the parties or a competent court judge. The broker in charge should hold trust money otherwise in safekeeping. Only the broker in charge holding the money may volunteer to pay and sue the buyers and sellers in a magistrate in a plea or lawsuit. And remember, the maximum on a small claims court is $7,500. So you should remember that when you're determining how much earnest money the buyer is going to put down. Parties should be told to seek legal counsel, as is in our ethics, Article 13. A broker in charge won his license case at LLR recently, but LLR continues to target broker in charges for contractual disbursement of earnest money. The South Carolina forms state who gets the earnest money in certain situations, and then the judge can use this language to award the earnest money. Parties can self-settle or hire a mediator to help them self-settle. Mediation agreement, SCR 518, which is your release, a contract, which releases a contract and says who gets the earnest money, or the SCR 517, which is a disbursement agreement without the release of contract. Again, warning: only disperse broker in charge held earnest money with a disbursement agreement signed by the parties or a competent court judge. Now we're going to go into the change with the repair procedure. And this is what the repair procedure section of your Form 310 looks like today. You're going to see some significant changes here in the next few slides. There's been a lot of discussion about repair procedure versus due diligence contracts. The addition language explaining how due diligence and repair procedure works was proposed by the 2016 SCR President Realtor David Kent in reaction to unprofessional licensees not using due diligence and repair procedure professionally. This will help make the professional practice of real estate in South Carolina easier for realtors. There's so much confusion about this subject that we've added the paragraph in yellow to assist helping licensees and buyers understand the difference between the repair procedure and due diligence. Again, the paragraphs in yellow is all new. The white is nothing new about it. So the new section, we've added this to the repair procedure section. The due diligence addendum, that is SCR 311, can create advantages for buyer and seller by creating a known limited time frame for a buyer to make a decision to buy or not buy, or buy with new terms, that is seller agreed repairs or price. For the due diligence addendum, the seller can receive money when the buyer timely, properly terminates for any or no reason under the due diligence addendum. The due diligence addendum covers a broad range of issues, not just repairs and price. The due diligence addendum allows the buyer to consider on-site and off-site issues. I think you can see how this is going to make it easier for the buyers and licensees to understand what we're talking about. This paragraph is all new. If the parties agree to a due diligence addendum, then during the due diligence period, buyer may take timely, prudent steps to help buyer inspectors, seller estimators, and realtors all have adequate time for the buyer to coordinate inspections and repair requests, for the seller to obtain repair estimates, for the buyer and seller to negotiate repairs, and buyer to potentially, timely, properly due diligence terminate or buy. Delivering a repair request does not extend the due diligence period. Delivering a repair request does not extend the due diligence period. The purpose is to get folks to understand the importance of getting the inspections done and getting repair requests to seller in time for the seller to obtain repair estimates and for the buyer and seller to negotiate repairs during the due diligence period. Be professional with your due diligence. Get your repair request in before the last day of due diligence. And again, delivering a repair request does not extend the due diligence period. Looking at Section 8 of the repair procedure, the yellow here highlights a definite change and will be in the September 1st, and it's one of our big changes. All repair procedure inspections shall be completed no later than blank business days after the contract's original primary effective date, unless the parties agree in writing to extend. The big change here is that we've gone from a calendar date to blank business days from the contract's original primary effective date. Some of us older folks still refer to this as a primary ratification date. So we've gone from the calendar date, the current contract says a specific calendar date here. We're changing that. It will now give you blank business days after the contract's original primary effective date. We felt this change would benefit those who have a contract going back and forth for several days, and all of a sudden the calendar date that inserted was no good. Now with the number of business days, this should be much easier. It also helps when there's a backup contract. There's been confusion about what is the original ratification date on backup contracts or when they become primary. Hence the word primary effective date is put in here. The system things in blue are proposed. Proposed changes is to add ventilation systems, window insulation systems, that is cracked window panes, loss of insulating window seals, to the list of items that the seller is supposed to take care of, to try and help clarify the broken window seals. Apparently there are quite a few hotline calls concerning fog windows and who's supposed to fix them and not fix them. So we're proposing putting this additional language in the section to try to clarify this and help everybody move along smoother. The remainder of the contract remains the same, of the paragraph, I'm sorry. In Section B, again, to assist licensees and buyers and sellers, we're spelling out those items that a seller should be responsible for repairing at their cost. We're proposing that we add ventilation systems, cracked window panes, and loss of insulation window seals to the list, which is the same thing we added in paragraph A, proposed to be added. The SCR listing agreement requires sellers to fix windows and appliances anyway, and it has for years and years. So this should not be a shock to sellers. Still continuing in the repair procedure section, the blue indicates proposed change. Here we're addressing the fact that if the seller does not respond at all during the number of days mentioned in the contract that they're supposed to respond. We have some sellers who just do not respond, and there apparently have been a lot of hotline calls from agents asking about this. So we have proposed to add, if the seller does not timely respond for above, what happens? Also want to call your attention here in this paragraph. The definition of as is here in this paragraph. There are a lot of misconceptions among licensees about the definition of as is. Contract clearly states it means the buyer buys the property or the purchase price, while the seller maintains the property from the effective date through closing, subject to normal wear, otherwise without repair or replacement, and sells the property for the purchase price unless otherwise agreed upon in writing by the parties in this contract. So again, just remind you that the definition is there. Now we're going to move on to our third big change, which is with the wood infestation report, which is Section 11 of Contract SCR 310. This is what it currently looks like. So the only definite change in this is we are now giving you the option of making it contingent or not contingent upon having the CL 100 done. That's the only real change. We do have a proposed change, but the only change here, the primary change, checkboxes to make the contract contingent or not contingent upon CL 100, was proposed by the SCR Executive Committee members, Realtor Sin and Weitzel. This will make practice of pen and ink striking, initial, and dating the paragraph much easier for realtors. In the past, a lot of realtors had just X'd out this paragraph, had it initial and dated. Now that will not be necessary. Many lenders today are not requiring a CL 100, and there are times when one is not wanted. Personally, I would not like to ever see one of my realtors X this section out or make it not contingent. I feel CL 100s are critical, and buyers need to know what they're buying. There's this phrase going around amongst realtors that there are two types of homes, one with termites and one's going to get termites. I believe we can give Rod Smith the credit for that one. Also, we have a proposed change here. It's to add the extra verbiage, buyer or seller shall deliver to closing, a CL 100. It's in blue, so it's proposed. This just indicates who's responsible for getting the CL 100 to closing. Again, the yellow highlights a definite and been approved, will be in the contract. Blue is proposed. The second paragraph of this section is unchanged. We've already mentioned a few proposed changes, but we do have some more. The appraisal section of the contract. This is a proposed change. Currently, our contract says seller has 5 days after being notified of a low appraisal to let the buyer know of their intentions, whether they're willing to take the lower price or not. But there's nothing about how long the buyer has to decide on what they want to do. There's no time frame except at closing. So we've added this, proposed to add this, it's proposed. If the seller is aware and does not deliver purchase price reduction amendment notice by seller's price reduction deadline, the parties agree to proceed to closing under the terms of the contract, unless the buyer then delivers notice of termination to seller no later than 5 business days after the seller's price reduction deadline, or at closing, whichever is earliest, whereupon the earnest money shall be returned to the buyer. There's been much concern regarding the buyer not responding once the seller agrees to sell for the price reduction. So we propose that we add this verbiage or something very similar to give the buyer a deadline. Another proposed change. On the first page of our SCR 310, Section 1, under the definitions, the effective date. The final date upon which a party to the negotiations places the final and required signatures and/or initials and date on this contract and delivers notice to initially cause this primary contract to be binding on all parties. Excuse me. The addition of the word primary came about because there had been some confusion about the effective date when there's a backup contract. This will clarify for due diligence, and also after September 1st, it would clarify for the repair procedure deadline. So we think this is a good proposal. Another proposed change, still on the first page of SCR 310, Section 2. The only proposed change here is simply adding examples of what terms should be added in blue. So if the property is going to be contingent upon the sale of another property, and then we say terms either are or are not attached, we've given you examples of what we're talking about. This SCR Form 504, which is the addendum contingency of selling property, or either a lawyer drafted form. I like the explanation of what should be attached if it's contingent on the sale of a property. It's helpful. I'd like to go over these 3 lines though for just a second, because I do see a lot of misuse of this when I review the contracts, and I review a lot of contracts. Let's say the purchase price, it is what it is. It's payable by transfer of good funds via finance or a combination of finance and cash, or cash. It's going to be one of these, guys. Either it's finance, or it's a combination of finance and cash, or cash. Typically, this finance would be a VA loan, if it's 100% VA, Or you'd have a combination of finance and cash. Say if he's putting 10% down or 20% down or whatever, there's a combination of the finance and cash. Or it's cash. Check a box. Then we have verification of cash available for closing. Either is attached, it's not attached, or it's to be delivered by a certain time. It's one of these guys, one of the boxes needs to be checked. The sale of the buyer's real property is or is not continuous purchase, and the terms are or are not attached. Either it is contingent or it's not contingent. Check a box. Still looking at proposed changes. We're still on page 1, section 3 of SCR 310. There are people that want to argue about operable condition. The idea of the contract is that the stove or oven in the house is operable. Any fixture or listed personal property is operable. That's the intent and idea of the contract. It might not work like new, but it operates. So this allows the judge to decide if the buyers and sellers want to argue if something is operable. So we're proposing just adding in here an operable condition. Then also down at the bottom of the paragraph, we have added here, I propose to add, in this section where we said the buyer acknowledges the opportunity to inquire about owners association issues, common area issues, blah, 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 lease issues, we've proposed to add and financed equipment prior to signing the contract. Leasing issues and items and financed equipment, see adjustments. And we've added in here tenants, rents, deposits, documents, and solar panels, fuel tanks. So the things in blue are the ones we propose to add to make life easier for the realtors. And also, we've had a lot of people talking about, I know, there are gas tanks at the houses, and maybe there's gas in that gas tank. Who's supposed to pay for that gas? Are the buyers supposed to pay for it? Is that equipment, is that tank financed? Is it leased? So those are issues that need to be investigated and checked out. And now with the solar panels are everywhere, so we felt like we should add solar panels as well. Personally, I think these are really good proposed additions. Under the finance section, we are proposing to add in here. There seems to be a lot of confusion about what goes in the blanks for minimum and maximum interest rate. I see all kinds of things, not interest rates, but see, that's what people do. I see all kinds of things about a lot of times I see the interest rates written in there, and it's not intended for interest rates. In order to assist the agents, we are proposing to add the interest rate line. Also, if your buyer is talking about they don't want to go over a certain interest rate, it needs to be in the contract somewhere. So I think if we add this here, then you don't have to add it in section 28 or add it with an addendum. You're able to put it in here. I love adding this line. The intent of the Forms Committee is that the minimum percent of the purchase price of the appraised value, which is lower, would be something like 80% if the person is putting 20% down. And then the maximum would be more likely 100%. I've heard of some folks putting 105% or things over 100%, depending on the type of loan the buyer is getting. Also, some agents like to have the maximum of 80% because they feel it makes their offer more competitive, especially in a multiple offer situation. But typically, you would see something like a minimum of 80% and a maximum of 100%. Then there's a lot of argument over what is a reasonable pre-final loan approval. That's been a big issue with my people and actually with me, to be honest. What does it mean? What it means to me might be something different to the other person. So we've tried to assist with that by proposing giving examples. Here in blue, for example, pre-approved letter, initial approval letter. So those are examples. It's saying approval, it's not saying pre-qual. So basically anything from a lender that says the buyer is approved without any unreasonable credit, income, or asset conditions. So an initial approval letter or pre-approval letter, pre-approval would work. I think these are good proposed additions. Another proposed one It's in our section survey, title exam, elevation insurance section. Here we've just inserted the words beachfront and flood contents. Brokers recommend buyers have property surveyed, title examined, elevation wetlands, beachfront determined, and appropriate insurance. Example, flood contents, hazard liability, owner's title. So we've added those words, or proposed to add those words, to make life easier for everyone, to assist our realtors in assisting their buyers. I think these are needed. Another proposed change is on page 8 of our SCR 310. And here the blue is the change, and we simply changed, it says customer representative now. We just change it, propose to change that word to facilitator, because that's really what you're doing. If you're not representing them, you're facilitating. You've now seen the changes. You've seen our proposed changes. So now I want to go to discussion of some of the forms. I want to start by looking at repair procedure versus due diligence. Repair procedure, there are 4 dates to remember. The inspection date, the date to notify seller of any repair request, the date for seller to respond on repair request, and the date for the buyer to respond to the seller's response. So there are 4 dates in this contract here that you have to keep up with and make sure your buyer and sellers get their work done at specific dates. But with due diligence, there's 1 date to remember. Under the repair procedure, it's better for the sellers because there are only certain items that the seller is responsible to repair, and those certain items are listed in the contract specifically. If the seller agrees to make the repairs, the buyer is obligated to close. If the seller does not agree to make the repairs, then the buyer has options. Hopefully by having the specific items listed in the contract, then buyers won't be asking for cosmetic things. On due diligence, it's better for the buyers. It gives them more freedom to inspect, and they can terminate for any reason whatsoever. I like to tell my agents that a buyer can terminate under due diligence if they don't like the color of the seller's hair. I mean, they can terminate for any reason whatsoever. It also can be good for the seller because they may be able to get a termination fee if the buyer terminates. I also think it's good for the seller that they know what the buyer is going to do quickly. If the buyer is going to try to get out of the contract, we all know buyers can figure out ways to get out of contracts. So if you have due diligence, at least it's over quicker. That's just my opinion. This should keep buyers, the items over here for the seller should keep the buyers from asking for cosmetic things under repair procedure. Not that it really does, as we all know. Repair procedure versus due diligence still. Due diligence is 1 big date to remember, but we all know there are other dates along the way depending on what kind of inspections that the buyer is doing and what they're checking out. I want to remind you of items that are not included in due diligence. The wood infestation report of the CL 100, outside of due diligence. The appraisal is outside of due diligence. The finance is outside of due diligence. I'll give you a word of caution also. We feel like you need to have a dollar amount as a termination fee in your due diligence addendum. 1 big advantage of due diligence is that there's only 1 date to remember, even though there are a lot of inspections along the way to be done. It's also nice to be reminded of what's included in the due diligence addendum. The due diligence addendum termination fee, it should be something of value. If you put 0, that's nothing of value. So I think you should use at least $1. It's not much value, but it is value. Why crack the door to an attorney making the argument that 0 is nothing of value? So if you put a dollar amount and then you deliver that money when you terminate. This is the due diligence addendum itself, which is the form SCR 311. just so you know exactly what we're talking about. I'm going to look at a paragraph of the due diligence addendum, and I'm going to caution you now that the pink highlights are nothing to worry about. I put them there because I wanted to emphasize those things. It says, and this is copied directly from the due diligence addendum, during the due diligence period, the buyer may unilaterally terminate this contract by delivering to the seller both the notice of termination and a termination fee of blank dollars, hopefully at least $1, of U.S. good funds. The termination fee paid to the seller by payment or by release to seller an appropriate amount of earnest money or by a combination of payment to seller and an appropriate amount of earnest money, escrow agent shall timely disperse upon buyer timely signing any required earnest money disbursement agreement for payment of the termination fee. If the seller receives the delivered notice of termination and the full delivered termination fee during the due diligence period, any remaining earnest money shall be returned to the buyer. Should buyer not deliver notice of termination and all of the termination fee to the seller prior to the end of the due diligence period, buyer agrees to purchase and seller agrees to sell the property in accordance with the contract. I just wanted to stress that although this due diligence addendum says earnest money will be returned to the buyer, brokers will not be able to disperse earnest money without something in writing from the buyer and the seller agreeing, or from a court. This verbiage is throughout the contract, as we've said before, so that a judge can make a determination. When a judge sees that the contract states earnest money goes to the buyer, then probably and hopefully the judge will direct that it be given to the buyer. This notice of termination that is being referred to here only has to be signed by the buyer. It's unilateral, as it says. Seller does not have to sign it. However, in order for the earnest money to be disbursed by the broker to the buyer, there has to be either a disbursement form signed, which is SCR 517, or release of contract, SCR 518, signed by both parties, or have a court order. Just driving this home, I've said it once, twice, probably will say it again. Again, the pink highlights are not new to the contract, but just me wanting to emphasize. Should the buyer fail to reach a new amended contract or terminate the contract, if they fail to reach a new amended contract or terminate the contract, the buyer agrees to buy and the seller agrees to sell the property as is. As is means the buyer buys the property for the purchase price, while the seller maintains the property from the effective date through closing, subject to no wear, without repair or replacement, and sells the property for the purchase price unless otherwise agreed upon in writing by the parties in this contract. This is copied directly from the due diligence addendum. It says if the due diligence expiration date comes and goes without an agreement between the parties or without a termination, the buyer is buying the property as is. This goes on to give the definition of as is. Again, this is the second time in the contract, and of course this is just an addendum to the contract. So many agents don't seem to get it. When the expiration of the due diligence is approaching and there's been no response from the seller, the agent must be sure that the buyer understands that either they must terminate or they are purchasing the property as is. Make sure your buyers understand that. Now we're going to move on to the Repair Addendum Agreement, which is SCR 525. And this is what it currently looks like. You've got lots of space here to write your repair request. The contract calls for the repair request to be in writing, and the repair addendum must be signed. Believe it or not, we get them sometimes that aren't signed. Sorry about that. The contract requires a written and signed repair addendum. Another thing I'd like to recommend that you do is please reread the agreement and think of all the ways that someone could misinterpret or get out of the agreement later. Reread it, pay attention to what you've written, and make sure that it's what you wanted to write. Once the repair addendum is agreed to by all parties, parties agree to proceed to closing. If you are under due diligence, once a repair addendum is signed by all parties, due diligence is over. It's over. The expiration date on that repair addendum does not automatically extend due diligence. So much confusion over this. I have agents trying to argue with me over this. The repair addendum, SCR 525, clearly states that if parties have agreed to a due diligence addendum, once the seller and buyers agree and both parties sign the repair addendum, due diligence is over. If seller successfully completes his repair agreement, the buyer waives any due diligence termination rights if the parties agree to a due diligence addendum and shall comply with the contract terms. This is copied directly from the form at 525. Just emphasizing here that this agreement between the parties of the addendum ends due diligence if due diligence was being used in the contract. Once it's signed, due diligence is over if you're using due diligence. Repair agreement, this is straight, again, copied from SCR 525. Seller agrees to make timely, good faith repair efforts, complete repairs at seller's expense, and provide reasonable time for buyer inspectors to conduct inspections of repairs and notice seller of repair inspection results, so seller can cure any repair issues, all not later than blank business days prior to closing date, which is your repair deadline. I'd like to point out here that in this section, one needs to give enough days for buyers' inspectors to go back out and re-inspect. You should always have the same inspector who did the original inspection go back out and re-inspect the repairs to make sure that they were done correctly. 1 or 2 days here is not going to be enough time for that to happen. So don't put 1 day prior to closing. You need more time than that. Your repair addendum continued. If the seller fails to complete the repairs agreed upon in this repair agreement, the buyer shall 1. Accept the property in its current condition, or 2. Negotiate and reach agreement with the seller for different terms, that is, other repairs, compensation, price reduction, or escrow, or 3. Terminate this agreement by delivered notice and receive their earnest money, as well as potentially seek legal remedies. This is copied directly from 525. Pink highlights is just me emphasizing. Agent needs to caution their sellers about this. If seller fails to complete repairs as agreed upon in this addendum, the buyer has 3 options, which includes terminating the agreement. Yes, it can happen just before closing. So caution your sellers. The repair addendum. Expiration of offer. When signed by a party and intended as a proposed addendum amendment to the contract, this document may be rescinded any time prior to or expires at AM or PM on a certain date, unless accepted or counteroffered by the other party in written form delivered prior to such deadline. This section of the repair addendum gets more agents in trouble. My goodness. Agents assuming that this automatically extends a due diligence expiration date, or automatically extends the time for seller to respond as per repair procedure. This has cost agents money because of them not understanding the purpose of this expiration paragraph. The purpose of this is to set a time well before the expiration of due diligence or expiration of seller's response to repair request and the repair procedure. Buyers' reps need to get due diligence inspections done and repair requests to the sellers in a timely manner so that sellers can get repair estimates and negotiate with buyers and leave time for due diligence termination. The expiration date in SCR 25 is only for making the repair request expire prior to the end of due diligence as a way of prodding the seller to respond and preventing the unusual but possible issue of the seller accepting repair request a mere second from the buyer terminating under due diligence, when the buyer has already made up their mind to terminate. This is not an automatic extension of due diligence, nor is it an automatic extension of repair procedure. This was not in repair procedures verbiage, it's my verbiage, this in pink. It's not an automatic extension of due diligence, nor is it an automatic extension of procedure. Now I'd like to look at the clauses for addendum amendment. This is SCR Form 391. I want you to see what it looks like, because I think a lot of people don't even realize we have this in our forms library. It's a great tool. This is what 3 pages looks like. This addendum covers many topics. It covers deed restrictions and restriction covenants, survey, Coastal Tidelands and Wetlands Act, backup clause, agent disclosure, soil and water tests and water issues, permit contingencies, seller financing, financing information, the Foreign Investment in Real Property Act, the hazardous materials, and as-is clause. This is such a form out there. Point out backup clause. I want to point out the backup clause. A lot of markets now, we have multiple offers and we're getting backup contracts. Backup clause verbiage is already there for you. You don't have to make it up yourself, and you don't have to unauthorized practice law. It is there. Seller financing. If you have a seller that's willing to finance, the verbiage is all there for you. House is being sold as is. The verbiage is there for you. It's a good form to know about and to use. Also wanted to talk briefly about LLR, residential property disclosure. LLR has made a change in this residential property disclosure form. Some of you may not know the change made. Thank goodness, it's a very slight change, but this is the front page of the current residential property disclosure form from LLR. And this, they've updated it. I want you to know I went through the entire form word by word, and this shows the only change on the form I have put here. It's in yellow. This is an actual change. This form now is really already on zip forms, so some of you may not have realized there's a change in it, because these are the only changes in the entire form. On this front page, it says the real estate licensee must material adverse facts about the property if actually known. What it used to say here was the real estate licensee must disclose adverse facts. LLR has added material to the adverse facts. And it used to say if should have known. Now it says if actually known by the licensee. And the other change is at the bottom of the form, they've changed the revised date to 6/2017. That way you know you're using the correct form. So now if an agent knows of a material adverse fact about the property and the owner did not disclose it, the real estate licensee by law must disclose it. So some of you may need a refresher course on what a material adverse fact is. So I've got the definition here for you. It's a condition or occurrence that generally is recognized as significantly and adversely affecting the value of the real estate, significantly reducing the structural integrity of improvements to the real estate, or presenting a significant health risk to occupants of the real estate, or information that indicates that a party to a transaction is not able to or does not intend to meet an obligation under a contract or agreement made concerning the transaction. So this is your definition of a material adverse fact. If you know of something that meets this criteria and your property owner did not disclose it on the residential property disclosure, by law, you have to disclose it yourself. The next form is new. Due to the amount of wire fraud that's happening in our state, the Forms Committee, prodded by Rod Smith of Myrtle Beach, asked Byron King and Nick Cremitis to produce a form that we can use with our sellers and buyers. My hope is that having this form will also help to get the realtors to pay more attention to the seriousness of the situation. This form is now in zip forms. It is SCR 610. Also, Zip Form Plus has a community called Zip Community. It's worth everyone looking into. They are touting it as a solution to this wire fraud situation. Zip Logic says this Zip community is providing a secure environment for you, your clients, and service providers to communicate. And here I have the link, and I went to bit.ly and reduced the size of it so it would be easier for you to write it down. This is http://bit.ly/2USR lowercase capital Z lowercase ZO. It's a link to get to Zip Community. Wire fraud is scary. This is serious. If you've not been involved yourself, count yourself lucky. I know that 2 cases with Agent on Realty alone in the last 6 months. No, the clients did not lose their money, but came close. One was $50,000, one was $130,000. The attorneys in both of our cases paid the money. Linda Hoberman O'Neill, a South Carolina realtor, became the victim of one of the biggest wiring scams in North and South Carolina in 2016. If you've not watched the video, you should. You need to take every step possible to protect yourself and your customers. And the link to the video, in case you don't have it and haven't watched it, I really encourage everyone to watch this video. http://bit.ly/2U1 capital P BJ capital U. That is the link for the video talking about Linda Hoverman O'Neill's situation. It will frighten you, and you need to be frightened. This is a very serious situation that we're living through. And I always like to end with my favorite quote: nothing is a problem until it's a problem. I talk with my realtors a lot about someone can go about not using the correct forms, not doing things the correct way, and they may get by with it for a while, but they may get by forever, but then they may not. Let's do things the correct way, and then we don't have to worry about things. Nothing is a problem until it's a problem. We at South Carolina Association of Realtors are here for you, the members. We're always striving to improve your real estate career and make your life easier. Thank you for listening.